means for us is making sure that we have a welcoming environment. We have a commitment to compensation that benefits our employees because they provide service to the public. We want people to serve with the city for 25 to 30 years, and when they leave the city, have a retirement and benefits that sustain them. We want our benefits, specifically pension, to support retention and recruitment. And so as you will see, the structure that's put together for this proposal encompasses those things. All of these investments are key and critical for us being a best-in-class government and for us to serve our citizens with excellence. As it relates to the city's fiscal condition, as most of you know, we have a historical fund balance, which underscores our financial stability, and it exceeds some of the requirements that the city has in place regarding those matters. As it relates to competitive benefits, we have discussed a compensation and classification study with you. Recently, we have done things to increase COLAs for employees to make us competitive in the market, and we have also looking at long-term benefits for employees. The pension program enhancements are incremental, but provide significant benefits to employees. They also are fiscally prudent in terms of the overall impact to the system. And I will say, being a CPA myself, fiscal management is where I start, which is why CFO Ballo and I are BFFs, because we are always looking at financial accountability and stewardship for the city. The benefits assessment, we did a thorough investment. We had sessions with the pension board, and we want to thank pension board members for their critical eye to this issue, their contributions to this conversation and to these recommendations. And lastly, I talked already about recruitment and retention. It's critical for us to have a workforce that is best in class and is prepared to do the work that we need. And if we lose people at critical points, we certainly want to do things to mitigate that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to CFO Ballo and the team to talk further about these recommendations, and also just mentioning that I have to leave around 11 o'clock to go to another engagement, but thank you for the opportunity to share these recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you, CO Benjamin. So I'll walk over the thoughts and some of the underpinnings of why the current recommendation for enhancements are, in our opinion, prudent, and some of the decisions behind the recommendations for enhancements. Before I wanted to get started, the first two slides, this is really just to orient everybody on the current retirement program landscape for the city of Atlanta. So currently, there are three major retirement systems. There's the DB plan, there's the hybrid plan, which is also known as the 2011 plan, and there's the DC plan. The defined benefit plan, for those who are aware, is the benefit is defined through a calculation based on years of service and how it's vested. You'll see the different components of each one of those plans and how they are alike and different in many instances. I won't go through them in detail, but they're in here to kind of show the entire landscape. So there's about 2,000 employees that are currently in the legacy DB plan. Most of our employees are in this hybrid plan that we'll be discussing in more detail today. And a significant number of employees are also in the defined contribution plan. So one of the major recommendations and need for us to start thinking more heavily about the 2011 hybrid plan is the hybrid plan is constructed so that there is a DB portion and a DC portion. To fully benefit from that hybrid plan, employees need to significantly contribute to their DC contributions. What we're seeing is that only roughly 20% of the employees are contributing more than the minimum requirement of 3.75. So, that is concerning, and we want to encourage employees to do the best interest for their retirements. The other thing that we've also noticed is while employees are contributing to the DC portion, there's approximately 25% of that population that's taking loans out against their defined contribution allocations, which further deteriorates over time and has significant impacts on their retirement. One other thing is the city does not participate in Social Security, so a strong retirement system is critical. The other component for the hybrid plan is it has a 1% COLA, and given the recent inflationary environment, we've seen that 1% COLA could be deteriorated quickly. And also remember that the outlook by the feds for inflation is 2%. So the 1%, in our opinion, is even lower than the target rate. And we wanted to shore that up closer to the target rate. COO Benjamin highlighted some of the other concerns with regards to the environment that we're in now, post-COVID, post-George Floyd, that has had significant impacts on recruiting and attrition. The 2011 plan was a great plan. It's also a transferable plan. So while it shifts the risk between the city and employees, it's also transferable, and employees can leave the city of Atlanta to other municipalities without having that long-term commitment to employment. One of the things we wanted to highlight, and you guys seen the slide over and over again, is the city's financial health is in best position that it's been in a very long time. And of course, I think it's best in most recent history. The 2011 plan contributed a lot to the city's financial health and stability, but we are in a different environment now than we were back after the recession of 08 and 09. We have done a lot of fiscally responsible things, and we've also learned from decisions that were made in the past, that were made in 2005 and even later. So that kind of helped us guide our discussions into why we're moving forward. Another thing to consider is the city is also experiencing a growth trajectory. That wasn't the case back in 08 and 09, and there was a lot of uncertainty about how fast the city could grow. There was restrictions with regards to capacity for water and sewer. There was limitations on a development, but the city has done a lot of infrastructure investments in the city of Atlanta, has really catapulted the city to grow at a faster rate than we thought back after the 08 recession. The goal for retirement, we think is a healthy way to continuously move forward. So you want to have ongoing evaluations to continuously make sure that the city is properly measured for its contribution and its risk. The employees are continuously focused. The taxpayers are continuously focused on in a long-term, standing city. We also want to make sure that there is a great emphasis on internal mobility. So we want to reward growth. We want to reward attrition. Talked about fiscal sustainability being a strong underpinning. Also offering competitive packages that includes salary and benefits. So benefits is a huge component to that competitive package. And talking about stickiness of employment for the city of Atlanta. So reducing attrition was also a major contributing factor. We had several different options before recommending the option we are recommending now. So there was an option to just increase the DB multiplier that's in the current hybrid system by 1%. We learned back from 2005 that when you do that, you're also doing it retroactively for years of service that have already been completed. So we wanted to be thoughtful there and come up with a plan that is both fair to employees and the city, but is also future-oriented and is looking, past the commitments that have already been made to date. We increased the DB multiplier with different tiers based on years of service. We thought about that, and I think that's kind of the area where we landed on. And then revert back to the 05 plan. That was an option that was discussed, and it's not affordable, so that was not recommended. In addition, we looked at some nuances to, what is an appropriate final age earning period. as well as cost of living adjustments, treatment for sick leave and other vesting schedules. So this slide here highlights the recommended changes to the defined benefit plan. So what our recommendation is, in a nutshell, I won't bore you with all the details, is that employees who are currently contributing 3.75 to the DC portion and 8% to the DB portion, that we allocate the contribution to the employees all on the DB plan and allow employees to make elective contributions to 457 or defined contribution plan. So what that does, it kind of balances the weight of the current hybrid plan to be a DB heavy plan, and also layer in a tiered system for years of service. So we want to encourage employees to stay with the city. You stay with the city for longer periods of time, your benefits improve, and the cost of living adjustment will be increased from 1% to 2% in line with the Fed rate target. So what does the proposed benefit formula look like? It is a tiered formula. It's a tiered formula that calculates the defined benefit portion based on 10 years of service. So your first 10 years of service would be at 1.6%. Your second 10 years of service would be at that 2% level. Final 10 years of service would be at that 2.4% level. This is fair to both the city and employees, and it really allows us to focus on attrition, because you'll be doing the heavy lifting on the front end of your career and the benefits on the back end of your career. So what does this look like in real life as we kind of pan it out and play it out? So we have an example here of a 12-year employee. 12-year employee was hired in 2011, was in the legacy hybrid plan. That 12-year employee, in this case, would not need to enter into the 1.6 level because they've already done 12 years at 1%. The next 8 years, they'll be at that 2% multiplier level, and their final 10 years will be at the 2.4% level. So overall, they would have a blended average replacement of 35.2%. And mind you, they're still keeping all the DC contributions they've already made in that first 12 years of service. So again, the rationale for recommended changes is that the cost provided in the 205 plan would be prohibitive and not reflect the DC plan's benefits earned to date. So that's something we learned in 25 that we wanted to avoid. Increasing the flat multiplier is something that would be costly to the city, and we didn't want to go down that route. And basing future service multipliers on all years of service recognized already, we didn't feel like that was fair either. So this is a balanced approach into our methodology and thought process. The tweak with regards to the final average earnings being 60 months instead of 120 months is we want to promote growth. We want to promote opportunities of advancement. So this is a focus that we feel like the enhancements will contribute to. Another small consideration that we wanted to consider before you as well is that there's a small group of active employees that were hired in 2010 who are currently in a defined benefit formula where they're still paying the 12 and 13%, the same as the legacy DB formula, except their benefit multiplier is at 2%. And so we want to bring those employees in line with the other DB participants. Since they're already paying the 12 and 13%, there will not be an additional increase to their contribution, but it aligns everybody in the DB plan to be similarly like, and it's about 100 employees that are in this category. So, you know, we the cost that Jeanette will show in the next set of slides captures the small tweak as well in that analysis. Having said that, I'm going to turn it over to our actuary, Jeanette Cooper, who will talk about some of the modeling and the financial underpinnings for this strategy.
Thank you, CFO Bala. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So we're on slide 15. This shows you the increase in the actuarial determined contribution as a dollar amount. And you can see from the slide, oh, I guess I have to turn the slide, hold on, there we go. You can see that it increases and then it drops. That's the first thing I think that pops out in you. That's because the plan currently has an unfunded liability scheduled to be amortized over 19 years. When looking at the numbers here, keep in mind that what is evaluation done on, say, July 1, 2024, first impacts costs for the fiscal year, July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. You have a July fiscal year. So these graphs were done assuming changes would be made on July 1, 2024. As a practical matter, implementation is being considered for January 1 of 2025. Looking out over this 20-year period, you can see that the difference between the contributions is roughly, it ranges. It starts out maybe in 2026, it's around a $22 million increase. By the time you hit 2040, it's a $42.8 million increase. And then at the end, it's around a $37 million increase. One thing to point out about this slide is you see the dollar increases, but it's just within the defined benefit plan. So it's not showing you the savings by the city no longer matching in the DC plan. So this is just what the DB increases, and we'll talk a little bit later about how that would impact when we take into account the city match. So if we go to the next slide, and stop me with any questions along the way. This is the increase in the actuarial determined contribution as a percent of payroll. And so it goes down because payroll is growing. We're assuming that payroll is going to grow each year. The average increase between the old and the new, and again, this is defined benefit plan only, is 6.3% of payroll. If we were to assume that the average DC contribution was 4.25%, and that would be matched by the city, that would drop the cost by, it would, instead of it being 6.3% over 20 years, it would be around 3.1%. So the natural question is, why is it not 6.3 minus 4.25? Why isn't it more like 2%? But the reason is that not everybody in this DB plan is getting a DC match. So it's only saving for those folks who are receiving the match. So it drops that 6.3% average increase down to around 3.1%. That's the cost of the new plan to the city. So then we go to the next slide, which is showing you as a percentage of the budget what these increases would be. And we're assuming that the budget is growing 3% per year. And you can see that it's roughly maybe a 3 or 4% increase in the budget. But again, the DB plan as a total of the budget is fairly small. Now on this next slide over here, we are reflecting the match. So if you look at this here, you can see we have 3 lines in here. The first one is the current program, but then we add in on that dark blue line, which is showing how much the city is paying in total benefits for both the DB and DC plan. And when we say DC plan, just the DC plan for those hybrid participants who also participate in the DB plan, not the DC plan for people who are DC only. And then the cost of the new plan is that light blue line on the very top. And there you can see that difference. And that's, just showing you how it spreads out over time. It's fairly consistent. But you can see at the later years, that difference becomes even smaller. Like once the amortization is paid off, you can just see, like when you look in the later years of 2040 and forward, it's a very small difference in the overall city budget. Let's see. That's the budget. So these slides I basically went over while I showed you the graphs, so I'm not going to go over them again. One thing I will mention, though, on this next slide over here, if you look at that bullet, the third bullet on this page, after 20 years, the increase in the recommended program is roughly 0.9% of payroll. And then it increases slowly to around 1.4% at 30 years. So it gets, as more people are in this plan and you have less people in the old legacy plans, your cost increase drops. Okay. One question you may have is why would it go up from the 0.9% to the 1.4%? That's because you have that tiered formula. So you have people moving from, being at the 1.6% level to the 2% or the 2.4% level. So it will grow a little bit. One thing that the city was conscious of in 2011, and they're conscious of again in 2024, is to monitor how the costs are working out and to make sure that the plan is not becoming too expensive, which could be not so much from design, but there can be economic experience. You could have an economic downturn and any reasons. So we were looking into what can happen if you have adverse experience, as well as what would happen, what can be done to mitigate that. So the slides you saw before assumed that every year the plan would earn 7% on assets. That may not happen. So we've been engaged to do some projections with varying interest rates, and we'll do those. Right now, under the current ordinance, when the 2011 hybrid plan was introduced, we periodically do a cap analysis. And what the cap is to set the contributions for the three plans, the general, fire, and police plans in total, at 35% of payroll. And if that calculated percentage exceeds 35%, a cost recovery plan needs to be implemented. The calculation of that 35% is done based on assumptions at the time of pension reform, so using the 2011 assumptions. In the event that it goes over 35%, which it never has in the time since it's been implemented, then the cost recovery plan would include a number of different options, including increasing the city's contributions, the employees' contributions, possibly further modifying benefits, or finding alternative funding sources. So under the new plan, the proposal this time instead is to do biennial projections every other year, showing
5-year of both the dollar amount and percent of payroll. Taking into account that there is no money going toward city money going toward the DC plan, that instead of having a sort of a cap of 35%, we'd be looking at 40%. We would also keep current and use whatever the most recent valuation assumptions were to calculate that percentage. And then in the event that the contribution is more than the 40%, we would look at a number of options. One would be to, again, you could do increasing employee and employer contributions, a lot of the options from the old one, as well as modifying pension benefits and using alternative funding sources. But another idea would be to revisit the amortization period that the liability is being amortized over, how the method is being used, as well as looking at the asset valuation method. We might recognize some gains more quickly if needed to help with the cost, if there's like a sudden downturn or something like that. That might help. And we might spread out the period if there's a big loss over which we're recognizing those losses. So going to the next slide. This is sort of like going back in time a little bit and showing you when the 2005 plan was implemented, what were the things that were done to improve the benefits at that time. And let's compare that to what we're doing in 2025. So while we are definitely improving benefits in the DB plan, it's not as dramatic, and it's definitely a more measured approach. So the first part was when the 2005 plan was introduced, the contribution rate stayed at 7 or 8%. Later on, that went to the
12 and 13%, but for a long time it stayed at the 7 or 8. Right away over here, we're moving that DC mandatory contribution into the DB plan, so you're helping to mitigate the cost by moving from 8% to 11.75%. Another difference is the averaging period. We're not going to 3 years. We're going from 10 years. We're going down to 5 years as opposed to 3, so that's a little less expensive. The benefit multiplier, instead of doing 2.5% for all years of service, and it also used, I believe it was 3% for your firefighters and police officers. Over here, we're doing that tiered approach with, the highest rate being 2.4%, and you don't earn that until you've had at least 20 years with the city. And for those who've already been with the city longer, it's going to be longer than 20 years. So you're really trying to reward those who stay longer. The other change I'll mention here, which is an important one, is the COLA. And the old COLA in 2005, when that was changed, it was, actually they maintained it, but they had a maximum 3% COLA in that plan. But in years when inflation was under 3%, you would save that additional money, and then in years when, so in other words, say inflation was 4%, that extra 1% could be applied in a year when inflation was below that. Over here, we're doing a maximum COLA, but again, we're basing it on inflation, but but we're not going to go over 2%. And in years where inflation is greater than 2%, it's not like that's used later on. That's just that 1 year, and it's not saved, so that'll be a savings as well. We just wanted to touch on, the next slide is recent benefit improvements among other DB plans, just as a point of interest. IBM had closed their cash balance plan, which is a type of DB plan, to new entrants in 2004, and then they fully froze it so no one earned any additional accruals in 2006. They decided in 2023 to reopen it, so they had just had a defined contribution plan, and they decided to bring back the DB plan. Another case we're using as an example is the Georgia Municipal Employees Benefit System, GMEBS, I'm sure you're all familiar with. They added some new members in recent years. We usually get a few every year who decide to open a new DB plan, never had one before. We also do a lot of benefit improvement studies, and then some of these cities go ahead and adopt these. So we've done typical improvements include either higher multipliers, unreduced retirement, sometimes improved retirement, so maybe the reductions are smaller than they would have been, and higher COLAs. They recently reopened, a plan had frozen and they decided to reopen. That had been, they had moved to the DC option and they came back into the DB plan. We've also seen more recently that while they're doing improvements, some, especially with regard to early retirement and unreduced retirement, and sometimes the multiplier, have been geared toward public safety employees within the plan. So that's been a recent change. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to CFO Bala.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
We've been joined by Ms. Liliana Bakhtiari.
Thank you. There is an appendix section before I get to the OPEB. Well, first of all, I'll talk about next steps. So ideally, been working closely with our partners in the law department to analyze and assess what a change implementation looks like, specifically with forthcoming legislation. So we continue to work there. There's coordination in the city charter that has involvement back with the Pension Investment Board. So the next step is within May or June timeframe, we'll be introducing some sort of legislation to look into this in its final version. We will be scheduling meetings with different employee groups to talk about the enhancement recommendations, answer any questions that they might have, and come back with a final adoption sometime in June, July. These could be moving dates depending on the time that the council needs for considerations and additional questions. Our intent is to have this effective on a January 1st, 2025 date. Gives us time to coordinate with HRIS and the systems and make sure all the stuff is aligned. So thank you, guys. There's some things in the appendix slide that I wanted to talk and dig a little bit into before we go into the OPEB discussion. So this slide here kind of shows the impacts and the benefits of shifting the COLA from 1% to 2%. So if you see an employee retiring at 62 and benefits they receive at that time, if it's growing at 1% versus 2%, there's a significant difference in annual benefits over time. And, we want to make sure that people are having a sustained retirement in their later years of life as well, too. And then the other slide I wanted to show here is for retiree at age 62 who works for the city of Atlanta. The first set of 4 graphs on the left compares the balanced hybrid between a DC employee who's only matching the 3.75%. So that first bar is a person in the hybrid plan who's only doing the minimum contribution for DC. You see, when you only contribute the minimum 3.75, there's not a significant investment in a retirement. That is compared to that same employee who is now in our enhanced DB model. They will have a better DB, an overall replacement ratio. The second set of graphs shows an employee who's contributing that 8%. And the last graph shows an employee who's matching the unmatched 4.25 into their contribution. So it really aligns well with our efforts to make sure that employees have stronger replacement ratios, and there isn't a heavier reliance on employees to make sure that they are contributing the full 8%. The first set of graphs is a market rate of 5%. The second set of 4 graphs is that the market's performs well and is returning 7%. And this is really important because I think the initial thoughts about the hybrid plan was that employees would be contributing that full 8% with the full 8% city match and strong market returns. And what we're seeing in real life is that employees are not doing that. They're only contributing the 3.75 and not the full 8%, even though it's matched. Won't necessarily, these are just additional slides, but one conversation that we also wanted to have and make sure that we brought in front of you too is that the council did ask us to, look into other post-employment benefits. So the city does have.
Maybe we could stop here.
Sure.
Because you have unloaded on us an unfathomable amount of data.
Sure.
So let's talk about the pension plan first.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, questions? And my questions today are merely going to be very, very baseline questions, and I will be developing many more as we go. So it's good to see we have an elongated review and adoption process here. But Ms. Bakhtiari, I know you.
Just one quick question, the piece that you were actually just saying about employees, what they're putting in versus what not the full amount. Do we have a fiscal literacy component to any of this that we're doing that educates our employees on how to best manage?
That is, we have it currently. HR does reach out, and we're part of this program too is to get with different employee groups in different ranks, coordinate with HR about just stressing the importance of retirement planning and thinking about retirement at an earlier age. That is something that we want to definitely build into just our future conversation with employees.
Let me piggyback on that. I mean, we do have there is that availability now for employees, but it is. So my question is, how do we better engage the employees and get better participation? Because what we have now is pretty anemic.
Right. So there is, of course, engagement through the boards that are currently in place. We have an entire we're looking into the whole employee landscape, right? We have a defined contribution board, defined DB plan investment board that we all sit on. Leveraging the resources of that board to engage with employees is critical. Leveraging our HR partners to make sure that we are having events and recommendations around retirement planning and being very thoughtful about it and coordinated about it, I think really helps.
Well, I remember a survey question that went out to City of Atlanta employees years ago, and maybe things have changed. I'd love to find out that things have changed. But one of the survey questions asked employees, would you rather spend 2 hours in a DMV line waiting to get your license renewed or sit down with an expert to discuss your personal finances? And the vast majority said, stand in line at the DMV. I mean, it was shattering to see that. And so I'm wondering, I mean, I'm hearing nice, rosy language, but how are we going to change what people's aversion to having these discussions?
Paula? We're going to come up with a comedy show. I have no idea. No, what we normally do when we're socializing new things or what we're trying to saturate the organization with, we try to bring a little bit more energy and do the road shows with it. Mary, you going with this? Yes. So we engage our partners and we try to do a road show, but as painful as it is, with all of the different things that we have been able to, I guess, introduce to the organization, we've been pretty successful with some of those road shows and getting traction and increasing utilization rates and just trying to hold the attention of the employees, but just doing something different because a lot of them really haven't even attempted to have these discussions in the past at all. So when we take it to them and actually sit down, and a lot of times we use lunch and learns. When you have food, they come. So that helps. So it just depends on, and also the different work groups in their schedules. So it sometimes requires us to get up really early to get there, and people really don't want to be bothered in the morning. So we may be able to look at some flexibility in schedules and try to do that in those spaces.
Just around the same thing, just making sure we're thinking about the trash man and making sure that he is getting the financial literacy as well. And because the lunch period, they don't get that same lunch and learn thing. So I would think about going to the roll call in the morning to making sure we're taking care of the sanitation person.
Yes, from the trash man all the way up to the mayor, everybody gets the same. But if we have to flex the schedules or we have to move everything around for the different operational departments, we do that.
Yep. Thank you. I did have a few questions earlier in there too. So on page 5, I was able to rip out a few pages. On page 5, when we talk about city employees, I'm always thinking about the 3 pillars of retirement. And because one of them is just removed from our city employees' Social Security. So we have to be I just want to make sure we're intentional about making sure people know that they won't have the Social Security pillar whenever they retire. So they need to invest in themselves right now.
Absolutely, that is 100% accurate.
So I think that when we talk to when we talk to all of our employees, I know that from the trash man to the mayor, but the mayor has a little bit more time, and like I have a little bit more time sometimes to meet you in different spaces, to meet you in different spaces in different places than the trash man would.
That is very true. So our employee population is very mixed, right? We have long-term employees, city employees who have started with the city and ended with the city. Their interaction with Social Security is non-existent. We have employees who've had 10, 15 years of service prior to coming to the city of Atlanta and do have Social Security, and Social Security is part of their retirement planning. And both of those employee groups need to have that conversation about how that looks like, because it triggers different things, and I wholeheartedly agree with you.
Please make sure we're doing it. I had a recent family member who retired from the city right before I got elected, and he was able to save, but he doesn't have Social Security, and I know he's feeling a little different now. Another page I wanted to talk about was on page 14, recommended changes. I want to say thank you for looking into the small group the small group of employees from 2010.
Right.
Sitting on the pension board, we've been able to hear from them. So
Yep.
thank you wholly for listening to them and making this recommendation. It's a beautiful recommendation, as it just includes them and gives them what they want, what they would like. So
Yeah.
thank you for doing that. Apologize. One more page up, maybe two. So one more AC on page 15, ACD in dollars and impact. Why didn't we break it up into the 3 different pension funds since we know they're separate?
So I'll let Jeanette answer that. This is the impacts to the defined benefit plan, but there is a slide that has both of those combined, and she went over that as well. The DC contribution, the DC plan wholly by itself is fully funded because by design, it's an employee match and an employer match. So there's no funding gap there. The funding gap is with the defined benefit plan. And some of it is a legacy funding gap as well, too, that we have to catch up on. But Jeanette is a much smarter person than I am about this stuff. So I'm going to step to the side.
And can I be more specific with my question?
Fire?
Yeah, so, yep, so I knew,
Okay.
so she understood. So what I want to know is why didn't, I just wanted to be able to see it, to make sure we're comparing apples to apples, because I want to make sure that this, I love the way this graph is pointed upwards. I love the way this looks, but I want to make sure that general, police, and fire are all pointed that way.
Head over to page 36.
Got you. That graph is pointed the perfect way for anybody who's looking at pensions. Oh, got you.
And then fire, which is, we went by the asset size of the plans. But you can see the graphs, dollars, similarly shaped on all 3. The magnitude is different, but the graph shape is similar on all 3 when you look at it.
No, I appreciate you. And it is shaped similar on all 3, except it is shaped. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Let me scroll through some quick kind of. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Amber A. Robinson, City of Atlanta, Department of Law. I did want to just add to the conversation concerning the Social Security piece. Upon being onboarded with the City of Atlanta, all of our employees do sign an acknowledgement that they will not be paying into Social Security during their employment with the city. So that is a part of all employees' personnel files, and they do sign that.
Let me scroll through some baseline questions here.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
COO Benjamin had to leave us at 11 o'clock. She had a different schedule, so just wanted to acknowledge that.
Well, obviously, we're not going to wrap this up today. So what is the administration's current philosophy about what should be the different buckets that feed into replacement income upon retirement or after retirement?
Yeah, so I think the current philosophy is that there should be heavier weight on the DB component, specifically for our essential employees as well as public safety. Given the fact that the job nature of itself is very demanding, we've seen a significant shift since COVID, as well as post George Floyd. The environment for policing has changed significantly. We also do want to encourage employees to contribute more of their income into DC planning as well too. So having a stronger DB component allows less of the onus on employees to be extremely thoughtful. We want them to be thoughtful, but we don't want them to create another part-time job for retirement planning as well too. And we want to be able to have a baseline replacement ratio for employees when they leave the City of Atlanta that they don't have to necessarily overtly think about. it does shift some of that focus on the city of Atlanta to be thoughtful, be better financial stewards, have better advisement and better returns on our investments. It's something that we're doing, that have been doing and will continue to do. But I think the philosophy is making sure that the replacement ratio has a floor that we're all comfortable with, even when employees don't do what they need to do. So that's a component of it. The other thing that we're thinking about now is we want to reward longevity for the city of Atlanta. So having a tiered, defined benefit calculation that progressively enhances as you work in the city of Atlanta is important. Then the focus for retirement becomes longevity and it becomes career progression. So these are the things that we're incentivizing, not necessarily, you play in the markets to make sure that you are getting there, and that could get a little dicey.
So let me ask the same question, but looking for percentages. So,
Correct.
so the
Yep.
traditional philosophy, correct me if I'm wrong, has been, because we don't offer Social Security, 2/3 provided by the city and 1/3 personal savings.
Correct.
That's helpful. Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, CFO, I have to, I triple booked myself today, so I apologize, I have to leave. What is the best way to follow up with you on additional questions? Can you just shoot?
Sure. You can definitely send email to myself, copy DCFO Carr, Jeanette Cooper, members of the administration. I'd also ask that you copy our law team as well, because they're very engaged in this process in crafting things that are having to be legislated. So to the extent that there's recommendations or considerations, we'd want to make sure that they have visibility into that as well too.
All I like to is just surprise Ms. Robinson. She loves that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, no, thank you so much. I appreciate that, and I really appreciate the time. I'm going to look over this for a lot longer as my brain seeps out of my ears, trying to understand half of it. But I'm very deeply appreciative to you all for this,
Thank you.
for this presentation and for the work that went into it. Thank you so much, and I will be following up. And thank you for the time today.
Yep.
All right, so the employees are not contributing as much as we'd like them to.
Correct.
Is that generally attributable to adverse overall economic conditions, or what are those factors, do you think?
I think it's, talking to some of the employees, recent inflationary environment has had a lot to it. Cost of living in the city has significantly increased. Employees are looking for maximization out of their paychecks. So, there is an intent, and when you talk to employees that, I'll do it next year, the following year, and the can gets kicked down the road a few times. But I think the cost of living and the affordability in the region has played a factor into employees wanting to maximize their net pay on their check.
Do you know roughly how many employees are in the 3 plans?
Yes, that is on page 3.
Okay.
We'll go back, and it's,
That's
I think about
fine.
2,000,
It's in here.
4,000. Yeah.
Yep. No, I'll review that.
Yep.
Thank you. Page 3.
Page 4, bottom of page 4.
Okay, the staged elevating multiplier idea, were there other models you were able to look at, or is this something that you developed as
Yeah, so
seems like a good idea?
it's a great idea. It was, love to take credit for it, but it really came to us from members of the investment board representatives for police, fire, and general. So Mr. Light, Mr. Hollander, as well as Mr. Berry, it's an idea that they've looked into and championed, and gave us some thoughts around it. And we kind of looked at it as the base and added the different components around vesting, around COLA, and different things to make it reasonable for both the employees and the city of Atlanta.
Okay. And I know you explained the benefit of adjusting the cap, but could you go over that one more time for me?
Sure. When the cap was put in, it was based on older assumptions. And keeping up with those assumptions, you know, I mean, as time went on, they became more unrealistic. So if you think about it, in 2011, I think the general plan might have been valued at 8% interest, and the other two at maybe 7.75. And this way, when you're doing projections on a more current basis, you'll be keeping up with the numbers a little more quickly. You know what I mean? Every other year, and you're using, you know, the current mortality, you know, all of that. So I think part of it was to base it on that. So it really is a similar cap. But
That would be a biannual?
It'll be biannual, be 5-year projections. Yeah. And so you're looking into the future. What you were doing before, you were doing projections under the cap analysis too, but you were doing them under older assumptions, which, you know, became outdated over time. So I think this keeps it more current and keeps it with, you know, today's dollars.
And so the last time we made a big change to the plan, a pension calculation tool had been developed that employees could access. And are we going to see more availability of that for this go-around?
Turn that over to someone else.
Right?
Yes, we do. We have a great partnership with our administrators, SBA, who's also here, and we will be doing that.
And my last question is around the 3-year, 3% annual assumed increases. I mean, FY25's more than twice that, so that seems very low to me.
Yeah, so I know, so the last couple of years, we've benefited a lot. I mean, inflation does also shore up the budget, right? So your lost revenues are increased. Strong housing markets also benefited us the last couple of years. When you look at over a 10, 20, 30-year time horizon, we felt like 3% was a reasonable expectation. Now, if the budget's growing faster than that, and we were conservative with the 3%, that just makes that graph that much better. So if our budget's growing at 4 or 5% for the next 10 years instead of the 3%, this as a percent of budget becomes much more absorbable.
Giving me the bends again.
Yep.
And we are getting the budget today, right?
Correct.
When?
End of the day. Sean, I think Sean, they have it printed. By the end of the day, you guys should have it in your offices.
Anything else, Mr. Lewis, before we move on to OPEB?
Yes, please. One more question. So is there any kind of way, because I'm happy that I sat on the pension board and was a part of this. So I was be a part of the tough conversations to come to this. So Mr. Shook, I feel so confident in a lot of the recommendations. Is there any way we can get this presentation video sent to our employees citywide? I know now that because we have email, can we just record this that's on TV right now, just send a link to them so they can hear the conversation?
I think this is publicly available. The link will be sent out.
Can we send it to them so that we could be, because we just talk about being more direct and we talked about being innovative with making sure they understood what pension, and I will have one question after that. But first, I want to be able to be innovative and let's get it to people.
Yes.
Thank you, because that way they can hear it.
Well, yeah, we normally try to, and just like we did with the class and comp, there was an actual SharePoint drive where they can go and grab everything that's all related. But when you all feel that things are this important, we can publish citywide.
And with that email of that, this presentation was so well intentionally put together. It has everything in it. Just share it with them, just so they can look at it. I think that way we get the support, we get people looking at it, and I truly stand with this. And my last thing I wanted to say,
May I ask one question though, or a favor maybe, or a little modification to that? When we send it, can we send it out when we're setting up the meetings for the employees so it will make sense to them and they'll connect and they have it to review in tandem with that?
Yes, I just want them to be able to hear that presentation that you gave today, because you explained everything so much. And when we had some questions, you were like, it's in the book. which is what I liked as well. And lastly, to make sure people get a good round number, we said 70 for 30 years, 70% of, can we give that round number out loud so that people can understand what happens if you max out, 30-year max out?
So if you look, and again in that slide, if you're here for 30 years, it is 2/3, 67%. But if you stay longer than 30, you can max at 70. So there's that option there as well too.
I just wanted to make sure people could hear that good round number. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, OPEB.
All righty. So one of the other things that we wanted to discuss is the city's other post-employment benefits. These are retiree health benefits. So the city does have several options to control those future expenditures and liabilities. Some of it is, can be done relatively quickly, such as our cost sharing and the design changes to the current plan. Some of it helps, fund future obligations through creation of an OPEB trust or employee group. What are they called? Employer group waiver plans, which help enroll people into Medicare Part D and drug prescription benefits. So there's a lot that we have in front of us. Some of the recommendations that I wanted to make are, some of the most immediate things is shifting some of that burden and that cost to our retirees. So when our costs increase, we share it with employees, which is what a lot of plans do. Some of it is also with regards to long-term thought process about who is benefits and at what stage. So a tiered approach makes perfect sense. One of the main things that we can consider is availability of alternative benefits. So if a dependent or a spouse is with a different plan, for them to take opportunity with that employer or pay a premium to the city of Atlanta if electing to be on the city's plan. That is something that we want to consider and dig deeper into, and be happy to have a much deeper discussion into OPEB and some of those optionalities. And the last one, of course, number 3 there, but last on my right brain oriented, but it's funding, right? So pre-funding OPEB early also helps. That is being intentional about setting up a trust or setting up some type of mechanism to pre-fund OPEB. So what does that look like? It looks like when we go through our annual budget process to set aside some of those costs, instead of doing for example, a 3% COLA, you're doing a 2% COLA and setting up some of those costs to fund those considerations. This last slide wanted to hammer home why it's really important to start thinking about OPEB in detail. So you see our total OPEB liability from 2020 to 2023 has decreased from about $1 billion to $756 million. But it's still a significant liability that the city has at close to $750 million. And we need to start being thoughtful about our post-employment benefits and how we tackle that going forward.
Well, sounds to me like this is very much a work in progress.
Correct.
It suggests to me that y'all really have yet to arrive at any decisions. These are all sort of, let us know these are discussion topics.
Yeah.
So what's the legislative sort of schedule look like in your mind for this?
I think the legislative schedule for OPEB recommendations probably be a month or two behind the legislative schedule that we have over here. To the extent that we want to combine them, we can certainly have that conversation with council about how quickly we want to move. There's just so many different optionalities with regards to OPEB. There's some that are quicker to implement, like the incentives around beneficiaries who have access to healthcare at different employers. Those small tweaks, I think, are things that we can consider in conjunction with this legislative schedule, and we'd be happy to bring that forth and what those costs look like.
Give me an example of what such an incentive would look like.
So an example of what such an incentive would look like is a current employee or retiree who has a spouse that is working at Home Depot, and that spouse does have access to healthcare plan through their employer. The structure would look like, we're recommending that you enroll in your employer-provided healthcare. If you choose not to, and you choose to be with the city's plan under your spouse who works for the city of Atlanta, you should pay more to do that because there is an optionality.
It's a disincentive then.
Yeah, it's a disincentive.
All right, well, in general, I'm relieved to see that we're going to be able to apply most of our focus on FY25.
Correct.
Not going to do all of these three things at the same time.
Yep.
And be done on the same day.
Correct.
Because, man, these two topics that we've just kind of breezed over here today are both huge.
Correct.
In their own right.
Correct.
And as someone who was led down the garden path in '05, man, we really need to be sure of ourselves when we
Absolutely.
adopt whatever it is we adopt.
Yep.
Because '05 just turned out to be a disaster. It's taken us this long basically to get back out of that hole, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. I think my questions around this are that people take the job with the city for the benefits. And so I think that I'm strongly against that removal and that option. I'm just thinking about even my own household where we have folks who have options of going with other organizations, but they choose to come to the city benefits because the city benefits are better. And so I'm thinking about folks who work for less for the benefits of the city of Atlanta. So
I agree, and also respectfully disagree in some components. In this thoughts around a post-employment benefit program should have those same foundational underpinnings of being both fair to the city and employees, right? All of these considerations come from the same competing pot of resources. They come from the same competing pot of resources for benefits, for salary lift, to our other employees that are in different plans, quite frankly. So if you want to be fair and balanced, we have to look at it in a entirely cohesive picture. Because if, there's also recommendations and thoughts about employees who want continuous COLAs every year. There are employees who are in a DC plan who want an enhanced DC plan. There are employees in other parts of the organization that have different interests. So making sure that we're thoughtful and fair about the entire benefit package and the benefit structure is equally as important.
And so I think part of I'm glad we did this presentation again, page 7. We talked about Atlanta being behind only New York City and Houston. I would like for us to look into New York City to see if that's something that they're doing. And I would like for us to look at that portion, because I'm just thinking about strong cities, and I'm thinking about where we're going and how we're growing.
I agree. I 100%. I think you should look at it on that portion and all portions, right? We can't just pick and choose the bests that every city has to offer in isolation, right? We sometimes, and we have conversations, I've had conversations with employees who say, look at this city and how much they're paying, and they're paying $80,000, $90,000 for a specific job. But if you look at that city's benefit package, it pales in comparison to what we offer at the city of Atlanta. So while we look at the New Yorks and we look at the other cities in specific categories, and they might be leading the charge in other categories, those need to be also measured against other areas that they might not be performing.
I think
as well.
only just being specific to removing the spouse, I want to look at the major cities specific to that. And I think the last thing I wanted to talk about.
But Councilmember, respectfully to say, when we're looking at that, it's very hard to look at a specific, isolated program without looking at their entire offering, because they might be the best in that specific program, but they might also not have an enhanced defined benefit portion. They can probably be entirely at a 1% DB plan, right? So they have different offerings, and you have to look at them as a whole.
I'm speaking as a person who my first role would ask me was the retiree coordinator. So I only worked with retirees who had moved to the South. And so I was able to work in Florida, and they have an influx of New Yorkers that move there. And so I was always able to talk benefit packages with Florida state retirees, city of Jacksonville and city retirees in the state of Florida, and New Yorkers who have retired in Florida. And so the benefit packages were just different. So I would like for Atlanta retirees, wherever they live, even if they stay here or live wherever, I would like for their benefit package to be A1. And I know they're on a fixed income, and they won't be able to receive Social Security, so one pillar of their retirement is already removed. I would just like for them to not inherit another expense. I would like for the employees, I would like for us to be looking at ways in which folks who are working right now would carry that burden because of all the other things that this administration has done. I would also like for us to look at making a one-time investment in our OPEB, looking at considering a one-time investment because people are living longer and the benefits are looking a little different now. So I would just want us to look at those two things. Not saying we have to.
Yeah.
I would just want us to look at those two things.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you again.
Thank you.
All right, if there's nothing else, I want to thank all the presenters here. You've given us a lot to think about, so thank you.
Thank you.
We're done.
All right, bye-bye.